My name is Kirsten Luce, and I'm American. I was born in Massachusetts and grew up in the mountains in Virginia. Somehow I ended up taking an internship on the Mexican border, which has made me have a deep connection to this area. I was a newspaper photographer for years. In fact, I've been working for about 15 years, and 12 of those I was working almost exclusively for newspapers. It's a medium that resonated with me. I think anywhere you go in the world, everyone can understand what you're saying when you tell them that you're working for a newspaper. And I really enjoy that medium because I think that it's the most egalitarian. Everyone can pick up the paper and have access to that information, and your subjects can understand how they'll be portrayed. My first job, like Cheryl said, was on the US-Mexico border in a small town, covering the Rio Grande Valley. I would have never known at the time that it would become ground zero for the immigration debate that's still raging today. In fact, if you've been paying attention to the American news the last few weeks, with the controversy over the children kept in detention and separated from their parents, that's happening mostly in South Texas. It's the busiest corridor for migration, and most of the migrants are coming up from Central America. So I'm going to show you some snippets of a long-term body of work from the border. And for me, I have been wanting to work on this story, and I've continued to work on it, but I cannot afford to simply send myself there for months at a time. So my process personally has been to either seek assignments or to find small chunks of the story that I can approach in a week or 10 days, and that then I can get published. That has enabled me to continue working on this same subject for several months, and for several years. Sometimes each chapter would be a couple weeks or a couple months. For me, the best training was at a newspaper because I was often sent to incredibly boring situations with terrible light, and I had to come back with something. So now when I'm sent out to situations where there is a lot going on, I get really excited. I have to push myself to try every different angle and to get as close as I can to these situations. When I'm dealing with law enforcement, of course, there are many access issues. I have to appeal to the correct person in order to get access, and that requires a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance. Sometimes I get access to go along with the Border Patrol. Other times they tell me no way. And when that happens, I have to circumvent them and find either local residents or local police that'll try to let me see their side of the story. Why do I keep going back? It's because I have a personal connection to this area. I get pretty frustrated when I hear simple answers or people like Trump coming in with one blanket idea, which would never work. And my goal is to give nuance to this story and to show how it's continually evolving. Whenever I'm working with Border Patrol or law enforcement, I almost always push them for a little bit more access than they gave me the day before. Oftentimes, they want me to work 9 to 5, the same shift that the PR person might work. I know that's not when things happen. I know that things happen at night. So I push them, and I ask gently, and I hope that they feel invested in my story, and I'm often allowed to spend several hours actually out walking in the brush on real patrols with them to see exactly how the US government is dealing with this crisis. I included this picture because it was from my first year at Foundry in Mexico City, the very first workshop, where I had decided I was going to do a story on migration. That was a huge mistake. There was absolutely no way I was going to get anything done in the 4 days that we had. But I did actually, this one picture did survive and part of my longer term story. I ended up shifting my focus to something much simpler and much closer to where I was staying. After a while, the Border Patrol got pretty tired of me showing up when they didn't want me to. And at some point, they came to me directly, and they said, "What do you want from me?" And I said, "I want to go up in the helicopters, and I want to show the pulled back, larger scale version of this story." And this body of work was published in Bloomberg Businessweek, and for me, it resonated really well with editors because it presented the same story that I've been shooting for a couple of years from a totally new angle, and at a time when the migration was at its greatest peak, and when there was more law enforcement working on the ground than there ever was before. A lot of the images surprised me. You can see a lot more from above than you can from the ground. For instance, this image, this is from a vehicle bailout where a truck full of migrants had been pursued by the police, and because they're trying to avoid detection, they sped up, slammed on their brakes, everybody spilled out of their car and scattered. Many of them got away, so this is an effective form of getting away from the law enforcement, but of course it's extremely dangerous. So here you see agents tracking footprints, trying to find some of these individuals because they might die. This was one of 7 or 8 chapters of this story that I've had published. And as I mentioned before, it's the only way that I would be able to continue this work is to publish it as I go. Now, a few things happened after I shot and published this assignment. Suddenly, this caught people's attention, and I was getting more aerial assignments, which were commercial assignments, which paid well. And also, I was getting a lot of interest from editors that all of a sudden noticed that I knew something and I had something to say about the border. But I also was surprised because the New York Times Magazine contacted me, and they said, I assumed they were going to ask me to do something on the border. And they said, no, actually, we want you to do something totally different. We want to send you anywhere in the world where you want to go. And I was elated and completely freaked out because I knew how to pitch a story. I knew how to pitch a news story. I knew how to approach that. I knew how to shoot an assignment. But this, for once, I was getting to shoot only for myself. And I could go theoretically anywhere that I wanted to go on this voyage. In my head, I had an image something like this of a birch forest, somewhere cool and nice, something totally different than I had done before. And I started realizing that my first thought was that I can't do this. This is silly. This is too light. This is not serious journalism. But I pushed back against that idea, and I pitched going to northern Lapland in Finland and going foraging for berries. Because at the time, all I wanted to do was go someplace cold, someplace peaceful, and someplace that I'd never been before, and someplace where I could enjoy these lovely cloudberries. And so off I went for 5 days to northern Lapland, where I spent time with a Finnish mom and daughter while we had coffee and sausages over the fire. This family took me out with their dogs through the boggy marshland looking for these berries. I met as many reindeer as I did humans. I had a lot of time to myself to think and wander and look at this beautiful landscape. This was one family's bounty of the cloudberries. Tried reindeer meat. Spent the night alone in a cabin in an island with only Princess, this husky. One day I was waiting for a ride to come pick me up, and I thought I heard them show up, but it was actually this guy. I talked politics with these brothers from Kilpisjärvi. I reassured them, this is when Trump was running, that he would never be elected, don't worry. A group of us went swimming after midnight while it was still light out. And I came back more refreshed and curious about the world than I ever had been before. For me, it was the most important lesson that you don't have to shoot the stories that you're expected to shoot or what people have seen from you before. That you can stop and take a moment, each of you now, before you decide what you launch into this week. What do you actually want to spend your time doing? What are you truly curious about? What palette do you want to discover? What kind of people, what kind of landscape do you want to look at? You have that choice this week to go in a whole new direction if you want to. That's it. Thank you.